I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Stephen Brusatte, who's going to be talking about the fossil record and some of the early ways in which we can actually study evolution.
All right, thank you very much, Larissa, and big thanks for inviting me. This is a whole lot of fun to be here among many people whose books I've read, for many years, scientists that have inspired me, the heroes of the Dover case. This is great. So I'm going to talk about the fossil record. Presumably Kevin Padian wasn't available, so you got me. We've seen in the last few talks, we've started to appreciate the diversity of life, the endless forms most beautiful that Darwin rhapsodized about, the millions of species that live today, everything from millipedes to Michael Jordan. But of course, the modern times is only a moment in time. It's just a moment. And the Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old. Living things have been around for probably around 4 billion years. 99.999% of everything that's ever lived is now extinct. And so if we want to understand evolution, of course, there's much we can learn studying the modern world, but there is also much that happened in evolution long before today and long before us. Now, luckily for us, the Earth keeps an archive. In the rocks of the Earth, there are fossils that record aspects of life, of diversification, of evolution for billions of years. And as a paleontologist, studying fossils really excites me. It excites me for many reasons. Yes, it's awesome to study dinosaurs, but fossils can tell us many things about evolution that it's just very difficult, or in many cases impossible, to glean just from studying the modern world today. If we want to understand the origins of major groups, there are over 10,000 species of birds today. How did that come to be? We can turn to the fossil record. Fossils can tell us about how evolution works over long time scales, millions, billions of years. Fossils can tell us how organisms and ecosystems adapt over long time periods, and how they deal with climate change, environmental change. Fossils tell us about extinction, the fate of every species that's ever lived, and particularly about those times of mass extinctions when many species die all over the world at once. Fossils can tell us about major transitions in evolution, when one type of organism drastically changes its body plans, its behaviors, in order to live a new lifestyle. And fossils can also give us a perspective on evolution of things that are very different, that used to live that don't live anymore. Extreme animals, plants that are no longer alive today, that push the bounds for what we might think is possible, but actually is possible. So, I could talk forever about fossils and evolution. You could teach entire classes on this. I could tell you all about brachiopods and forams and plants and all kinds of species, but because I mostly study dinosaurs and mammals, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know in very, very quick stories of the fossil records of these groups and what they tell us about some of these bigger themes in evolution. And so, believe it or not, both dinosaurs and mammals have the same origin story. Both of these great groups, these great dynasties of Earth history, they go back to the Triassic period, about 230 million years ago, back at the time of Pangaea, the supercontinent, when all of the world's land was gathered together. And this wasn't too long after the very worst mass extinction in Earth history. The closest life has ever come to completely dying out. Maybe 95% of species were obliterated in a volcanic apocalypse. But some things survived, the world recovered, new plants and animals have the opportunity to diversify on this supercontinent, and that's where dinosaurs and mammals got their start. And since that time, the fates of dinosaurs and mammals have been forever intertwined. Now, the very first glimpse we have of dinosaurs in the fossil record is not the big bones of T-Rex or the earth-shaking skeleton of a brontosaurus. It's actually very humble fossils like these wispy little handprints and footprints, each just about an inch long or so, that are found in rocks, in this case from Poland, just 1 million years or so after that great volcanic apocalypse. And we can do the Cinderella thing and match feet to the footprints, and we can tell that it was an animal like this that made those tracks. A small little animal, just about the size of a house cat, really, that you could fit in your arms. And what you're looking at here, this quite, I think, awkward, gangly-looking creature, which is, believe it or not, a type of reptile, what you're looking at there is essentially the ancestral dinosaur. That's where dinosaurs came from. So it doesn't look anything like a T-Rex or a Brontosaurus. Those great dinosaurs would come later. And in fact, for the first several tens of millions of years of dinosaur evolution, dinosaurs were like this, just the size of cats, dogs, people, maybe up to the size of giraffes or so. Not particularly important animals in their ecosystems, not particularly diverse, far outnumbered by giant salamanders and a whole bevy of crocodiles, plant-eating crocodiles, crocodiles with sails on their backs, crocodiles with beaks, throughout the remainder of the Triassic period. But then, talking what Sean talked about, chance in the history of life and evolution, something totally unexpected happened. Not the first time dinosaurs would have to deal with something really unexpected. But what happened about 200 million years ago, the Triassic period ended as that supercontinent fractured apart. And of course it did. That's why we have separate continents today, and that's why South America and Africa look like puzzle pieces that fit together, because they once did. Now, today it's the Atlantic Ocean that fills the gaps between these continents that have moved apart from each other. But before the water came in, the Earth bled lava. For at least 600,000 years, there were massive volcanic eruptions all along what's today the Atlantic seaboard. And this led to another one of these great extinctions, where a huge percentage of all living things died out in a pretty short period of time. Those volcanoes caused extreme climate change. All the carbon dioxide, the methane that erupted went into the atmosphere and caused runaway global warming. Now, a lot of things died. A lot of the competitors of those early dinosaurs died, but dinosaurs made it through. And we don't actually know why. It's one of the biggest remaining mysteries about dinosaurs. There's still plenty of mysteries, things that we don't know. But we do know that dinosaurs did make it through. They were one of the great survivors of this extinction. And then afterwards, as the Triassic period turned into the Jurassic period, that's when you get the dinosaurs that we all know, the big ones. The meat eaters the size of buses, the long neck ones that got bigger than jet airplanes, the ones with horns and spikes and duckbills and frills and dome heads and plates on their backs, and all those sublime, fantastic things we think of when we think of dinosaurs. And there's a reason it's called Jurassic Park, the book, the films, because it's in the Jurassic period, several tens of millions of years after dinosaurs got their start, that they became the dinosaurs that we all dream about or have nightmares about. Now, there were thousands of species of dinosaurs that lived over their more than 150 million years of evolutionary history. And dinosaurs are one of many case studies from the fossil record, where we have a lot of fossils, a lot of species, an understanding of their family tree, and we can actually look at how they changed and evolved over time as their world was changing around them. They had to deal with rising and falling sea levels, with times of extreme temperatures, times of cooler temperatures, volcanic eruptions, and, as we'll see soon, as we've already seen in Sean's talk, another unexpected moment of catastrophe. But dinosaurs, they are a great example of this, of a dynasty of Earth history, that we can learn a lot about how evolution works over long time scales by studying dinosaurs. One of the things that we see with dinosaurs is that evolution is capable of producing absolutely fantastic creatures that are so out of scale and out of scope of anything alive today. Something like a T-Rex, the size of a bus, 7 or 8 tons. It had to support itself just on those hind legs, tiny, pathetic little arms. Who knows what they were doing? Head the size of a bathtub, jaws so strong it could crush the bones of its prey. There's nothing alive today, anything like this. If we did not have fossils, we would not know that these types of creatures ever existed. That is another thing, prime example of what fossils can tell us about evolution. But another thing fossils can tell us about evolution, really in a way that we just can't get from studying animals and ecosystems today, whether in nature, whether in the lab, by running experiments and so on, is major evolutionary transitions, how one group can change into something totally different, taking on dramatic new behaviors. And in dinosaurs did many things over their many tens of millions of years of evolution. But one thing that dinosaurs did is that not all of them got big, like the tyrannosaurs over time. Some of them did the opposite, and they got smaller over time. And among them were the raptor dinosaurs. This here is the real velociraptor. Maybe some of you have seen the films. I can't knock the films too much, but that view of Velociraptor in the original Jurassic Parks, big, scally, green, kind of like an overgrown crocodile, we now know that's not true. We now know that actually Velociraptor was covered in feathers, and it even had wings on its arms. The reason we know that is because there are fossils of dinosaurs with feathers all over their bodies. And talk about chance and luck and fate and circumstance. Sean, you can use this one in your talks. Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg didn't know about these because the first one was found by a farmer in China in 1996, 3 years after the first Jurassic Park film came out. So who knows how our concept of dinosaurs might have been different in the public eye if those farmers started to find these fossils earlier. But in China, there were these entire ecosystems in the Cretaceous period buried by volcanoes, ecosystems captured in stone, almost like Pompeii when Vesuvius erupted. So you get this riot of plumage, of soft tissues, the feathers, but also skin and muscles and so on, preserved with the dinosaurs. And we now know that many dinosaurs had feathers. When this was discovered in the 1990s, this was really the final piece of evidence to seal the deal that today's birds evolved from dinosaurs. This is an idea that goes back to the time of Darwin. Huxley, Darwin's great disciple, self-proclaimed Darwin's bulldog, he first argued this. Darwin even put it into one of his later editions of The Origin of Species, how this dinosaur-bird link was a great example of evolution in deep time. But people debated about it for a long time. But finding feathers, a feather is so unique, so intricate. Finding feathers on dinosaurs really sealed the deal. But what these discoveries have done, beyond just demonstrating that that theory is most likely correct, is they've given insight into how birds evolved from dinosaurs, how birds started to fly. And what we see with these Chinese fossils is that feathers were a normal thing for dinosaurs. Feathers were to dinosaurs what hair is to mammals, okay, the default condition. This is part of the tail of a tyrannosaur. Those are the bones below. The things above that look like little scratches in the rock, those are feathers. And in fact, those same types of feathers are seen on a whole bunch of different species of dinosaurs. They're seen on meat-eating dinosaurs like this tyrannosaur. They're seen on some plant-eating dinosaurs. They're seen on little dinosaurs. This dinosaur was just about the size of a big dog, a very primitive T-Rex relative. But there are other dinosaurs that weighed over a ton, that were 30 feet long, that are covered in feathers. So feathers were a normal thing. You map it on the phylogeny, the family tree of dinosaurs. The only real conclusion there is that the common ancestor of dinosaurs must have had feathers. But these are the types of feathers that most dinosaurs had. Simple little bristles that looked like hair. And that means, obviously, that feathers could not have evolved for flying. These dinosaurs couldn't fly with those little strands of plumage any more than we can fly with our hair, or what's left of it. And so, this is one of those insights that fossils often give us about evolution. Structures that perform a certain behavior, a certain function in animals today, evolved for different reasons, and their function has changed. Most dinosaurs probably have these types of simple feathers, probably for insulation, the same reason mammals most likely evolved hair, to regulate body temperature, to regulate metabolism. But one group of dinosaurs, those small raptor dinosaurs, as their bodies were getting smaller, they packed those feathers ever more tightly along their bodies, and they started to lengthen those feathers out, and those feathers, in some cases, turned from little strands of hair into brushes with many branches. And then some of them flattened out even further with a central quill and veins sticking out from each side. And what's really interesting is that there's a congruence between what we see in the fossil record, patterns across the family tree of dinosaurs, evolution in feather form over millions of years, with how feathers develop in birds today. The evolution of feathers over time went from those simple little strands into these more complex brush shapes. That's the same way that feathers develop in the embryo of birds today. Classic Evo Devo here. If you want to learn more, Sean Carroll's books are a great place to start. So, feathers became more complex over time, and some of these dinosaurs started to line up those flattened feathers with the central quill along their arms to form what can only be called a wing. That's a wing right there. And the way those feathers attach to those bones, the way they're oriented, the way they layer over each other in this dinosaur, dead ringer for how feathers form wings in birds today. But this is not a bird. This is a raptor dinosaur, one of the closest cousins of Velociraptor. And we see in the fossil record that a whole bunch of these raptor-type dinosaurs had wings on their arms. But we've done the calculations, and these wings are far too small to provide any kind of aerodynamic force if these dinosaurs were flapping them around. They couldn't provide the lift and thrust needed to get these dinosaurs airborne. So that means wings must have evolved for something else too, and we don't know the answer. There's many things birds use wings for today, but maybe they evolved for display reasons. That's one leading theory. Advertising billboards to attract mates, intimidate rivals. And then later, their function changed. And you can imagine these raptor dinosaurs already covered in feathers all over their bodies, wings on their arms for display. There's a long-term evolutionary trend. They're getting smaller and smaller over time. The wings are getting bigger over time, as ornamental structures often do. Darwin wrote about this in his books on sexual selection. And you can imagine these trends kind of converging, where there was a point in evolutionary history where the bodies of these raptors became small enough, the wings big enough, that when those display billboards were moved around a little bit, just by the laws of physics, they would start to provide a little bit of lift, a little bit of thrust, and at that point, flight was born. Really by accident, like everything is in evolution, but this is a prime example. And so what we have with the dinosaur fossil record here is we have this beautiful evolutionary sequence. No, we don't have every fossil in this sequence, but this is one of the great textbook examples now of an evolutionary transition, how small ground-dwelling dinosaurs changed their bodies, changed their feathers over time, and took to the skies. And in this way, this is a great example of how, you're not going to get this story in of pandas and people. This is a great example of how the irreducible complexity of a bird wing, you take away some of the feathers, you take away the wishbone, you take away the fused hand, all these things. Any one of those bits, you take them away, a bird can't fly. Irreducibly complex, right? But we know from the fossils, step by step, that these things evolved piecemeal. The components of the bird flight apparatus evolved for many different reasons. Their functions changed over time. These things were repurposed. The same way, really, when the Wright brothers invented the airplane, they didn't invent the propeller, they didn't invent the wheel, they repurposed those things. They used them in a new way. To me, this right here is the greatest argument against irreducible complexity. Now, what it means is there are still dinosaurs with us, okay? There's over 10,000 species of dinosaurs still alive today. Some, like our majestic bald eagle, beautiful, powerful birds. Some of a very different character. And we run into these guys in Edinburgh all the time where I live. Actually, they flock around our house. They come down if we're ever trying to eat outside on the 2 nice days a year where it's sunny. They come down and try to take our food in the garden. But I really do think that, with apologies to Neil Shubin, my old college mentor, that when you observe one of these things, their nastiness, their feistiness, their agility, their cunningness, you really do sense the inner velociraptor in a seagull. And really, that's only slightly a turn of phrase, because a velociraptor is one of the closest cousins of birds. Now, that means dinosaurs are still with us. There are over 10,000 species. That's basically double the number of mammals that are alive today. Now, we think of today being the age of mammals, and in some ways it is. There might be more dinosaurs still around, but if we look at the spread of mammals, everything from manatees to Muhammad Ali there, he's almost cut off, there's a huge diversity of size and shape and function and behavior in mammals. Bats, whales, elephants, humans, and so on. Now, this great diversity also was established over evolutionary time. And again, the very first mammals go back to Pangaea, the Triassic. They were living with the very first dinosaurs. They evolved from these ancestors called cynodonts, these things that were also about the size of a house cat, that survived that terrible extinction that almost killed off all life. They probably survived because they were a bit smaller, because they could dig burrows. We find them fossilized in their burrows, their own personal hiding places, and we can tell from their bones that they had started to evolve hair and whiskers, which could help keep their bodies warm. pretty good thing if the climate's fluctuating around you. So that's probably why these distant ancestors of mammals survived that volcanic apocalypse. And then in the Triassic period, as dinosaurs were getting their start, in fits and starts becoming a little bit bigger, mammals did the opposite. Mammals went into the shadows. They got smaller and smaller. And the first, what we would call true mammals, and that just is a definition that has to do with the structure of the jawbones, were animals like this. Tiny little things that if you saw them, you would think they were probably a mouse or a shrew. And this is what their actual fossils look like. That's the CAT scan of a skull. That down there, oh, the scale bar is cut off. I have a scale bar down there. You can start to see it. That's a single grain of rice. So that is the jaw of one of these first mammals. So really the story is from the Triassic onwards, the dinosaurs would get bigger, the mammals would get smaller. That was their own survival strategy in that new world after that great extinction. And as mammals got smaller, there were lots of other changes in their anatomy and their biology and their behavior and their physiology. They simplified their jawbones. So what used to be the many bones in the lower jaw of the ancestors simplified down to one. Stronger muscles could attach to that single jawbone. The teeth became the differentiated complex teeth we know today, the incisors, canines, premolars, molars that fit together so tightly when we close our jaws. Teeth that can pulverize and chew food. In order for that to happen, you can't just be changing teeth throughout your life. They would never fit. So mammals evolved a system where adults would just have one set of teeth. But what do you do when you're a baby? Well, when you're a baby and you're still growing, you need to find a way to eat, to get sustenance, and milk came into the picture around then. And that's why we have milk teeth. Those are the teeth we have at the time when we're young, when our jaws are not fully grown. Milk is a great substance, nutritious, sustainable, and it was around the time that we see these changes in the jawbones and the teeth that we see the brain size of mammals greatly expand. All of these things were happening as mammals were getting smaller. We don't really know what was driving what. You know, it's hard to tell from the fossils. It's really a type of evolution that we call correlated progression, where there's lots of changes that are happening in concert with each other. In this case, as mammals were getting smaller. And so it was these small mammals that thrived underfoot of the dinosaurs for over 150 million years. And we often think of mammals as being these second-rate characters during the age of dinosaurs. But not really. There are fossils of mammals found in those same volcanic beds that preserved the feathered dinosaurs. And we can tell there was an enormous diversity of mammals. There were even ones that glided through the air on wings of skin over the heads of dinosaurs. So it was mammals that were experts at being small, at living incognito, where the dinosaurs got big. And that was, a more or less kind of an evolutionary equilibrium for a few, 150 million years or so, until that single worst 30 minutes from Sean's 30 minutes in the history, the 4.5 billion year history of life on Earth. That rock, that 6-mile wide rock, hurtling through space, could have gone anywhere, traveling like 10 times faster than a speeding bullet, smashes right in to the Earth, hits the Gulf of Mexico. Can I call it that still? Yes. Am I allowed? All right. Gulf of Mexico. Leaving a crater, a hole, punched a hole in the Earth over 100 miles wide, unleashed more energy than 1 billion nuclear bombs put together. This caused that terrible extinction that wiped away all of the non-bird dinosaurs, plus 75% of everything else. But some mammals and some birds made it through. And one of the best places that we can find fossils of these animals is in New Mexico. I've done a lot of work in New Mexico over the years. And we've been very generously supported by the NSF. We got some NSF grants. Remember those? And so actually, I got a DDIG for my PhD. I got a GRF, so the NSF grants supported my graduate work. I wouldn't be here without that support. And then when I was a young professor, we had 2 NSF grants to support this work in New Mexico. The last one ended in 2023. Good thing, because we worked with the Navajo Nation. And this grant in fact, I know it would have been terminated if it was an active grant now. That would have been seen as DEI. Many other grants have met that same fate, simply by working with the Native American tribes. Anyway, this supported us to study how mammals took over from the dinosaurs. And what we see, for 150 million years, there were mammals living with dinosaurs. But they were small. They never got bigger than about a badger in size. Then the asteroid hits. some mammals survive. And almost immediately in New Mexico and also around the world, we start finding huge numbers of fossils of these mammals. And within 200,000 years of the extinction, we have mammals the size of pigs. Within 1 million years of the extinction, mammals the size of cows. So these mammals are getting big fast. And it's not all mammals. It's really one particular type of mammal that's thriving, the placental mammals, the ones like us that gave live birth to well-developed young. And we can tell from their fossils that some of these first placentals living soon after the asteroid actually had long pregnancies. There's a chemical signature in the teeth of these mammals. My colleague Greg Funston, who worked on this, he gave a talk here recently about this, finding these chemical signatures in the teeth. We can tell that these mammals, they raised their babies in their womb, some of them for 7 months. 7 months, and they gave birth to large babies, and that was one of the things that probably helped them survive the extinction, but also to get big in size afterwards. And here we are today, placental mammals in this room. So I want to thank you for being here. Thanks again for the invitation. Thanks for all of your attention. Happy to take a question or two if we have time. Otherwise, we'll all be hanging around later. So thank you very much.